Okay, so I was asked to come and have a bit of a chat to you about social media and social productivity. And so I've done a little bit of thinking about how really this is about innovation in organisations and the opportunity that you have. And the human brain, as we're aware, is a very powerful pattern maker and a good pattern user, but a poor pattern breaker. And for those of you that have tried to give up smoking, you'd probably get that one. The thinking patterns are like highways in the brain. So it's just, it's the path of least resistance, off we go, and that's where we go where we've always been. And that's not always a good thing. If you look, and what I've done is I've pulled out some figures from Department of Health's annual report 2012-2013, which is the only ones I had access to. So there was something like, at the time, about 4,600 FTEs, I think, that were potentially people who could be coming up with ideas. And back to John's point about don't just come up with an idea, actually think a little bit more about it before you, and maybe that's where the idea fairy is coming from. I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with that. But potentially there's that opportunity there. But what happens is, because of those highways in the brain and the fact that we're in business as usual and we've got our planning to do and we've got our information management and we've got this and we've got that and we've got the other, our brains just don't have time or the space because we're so busy in the doing to actually take it in a different path. So I'm going to share a case study with you today as part of this, which was an organisation, an agency, who were trying to have a technology implementation to fix their information management problem. And 3 times they had failed at this technology implementation. What happened was they needed to break patterns. After 3 failures, the leadership brought in a new CIO. The new CIO had no technical background, she was commercial. This woman had the courage to actually go out and do a bit of learning before. What's gone on? What's happened? Why has it been what it's been? And then she had the courage to go back to the senior leadership team and say to them, you know what? I'm not going to fix your technology because your technology is not your problem. I'm going to fix your problem, and your problem is that you're never engaging your people. You're always doing it to them. You're not actually finding out what the real issues are, and you're not addressing the problems. It's about how can we connect with them, how can we help them connect with each other, and how can we find out what the real issues are. It's about giving them a voice. How do we do this? Because it's an organisation where people had lost their voice. It's about tapping into the wisdom of crowds. Another thing that she did was she put some money together. Now, we know that senior managers want to see the impact on the bottom line. So I've got some data here, I've got some facts, and I've got some figures for you today. So the average knowledge worker, and this was the information that was available to them at the time, the average knowledge worker spends 25% of their time retrieving and or reusing business information. For this particular agency, it translated to a cost of $45 million a year. Industry benchmarks that they found suggested that with doing this efficiently, by doing it a different way, they could get gains of 5% of productivity increases. That was an efficiency gain of $2.25 million per annum. So they got a lot of support for their project because they were able to quantify potentially what was happening to the business and the impact on them. They innovated in the areas of change management. We heard about change fatigue earlier today. The only way to build change resilience is to recognise change and to deal with change effectively. If change fatigue is occurring, it's usually because the change is not being managed well. They innovated in the areas of communication. So instead of taking a traditional, and to those of you who do that, this is nothing against you, this is just, so instead of taking a traditional communications approach, they actually looked at what do we do with content marketing? How do we do that a bit differently? And is there some things that we can apply to this that can help us do this? So we talk about the poster on the back of the dunny door. You know, there were lots of different things that they did. They had a digital native who got his iPhone, came up with a very, very corny script for a video, went around and connected with people inside and outside, and came up with this video that was then playing in all the lunchrooms and was sent around to people and everything, and it was about people connecting. Oh, so that's Harry. And it was about the topic. It was helping them understand what it meant to real people. It was about collaboration. It was wherever possible getting people to have the conversations, the focused conversation, to enable them to understand what it was they needed to do and why. And effectively using existing and new technology. So they tapped into Yammer as an example. So that was and very much had a campaign approach and things like that. So it wasn't just, okay, we can only use Yammer for business and we can only use Yammer for the business focus, but getting people to learn by using it in the business focus so that then they can use it more productively in the rest of the way they do their work. And the innovative stuff and everything else can still bubble up around the edges as it does. So let's talk about social media. 70% of extra profit to be made through social technologies has nothing to do with marketing. We're talking about unlocking existing knowledge. If only we knew what we knew. We're talking about collaboration across silos. Silos have their reason for being. There's good, solid reasons for them to be there. But how do we bridge those silos so that we can have some constructive outcomes? It's about providing a voice to our people. It's about enabling social ratification. And it's about facilitating innovation. At the end of the day, if we can increase our productivity without cutting hundreds of heads, then we've got to have a bonus for it. While 72% of companies use social technologies in some ways, very few are anywhere near achieving their full potential. When used within and across enterprises, they have the potential to raise the productivity of highly skilled workers by 20 to 25%. So it's fairly significant figures. I'd just like you to take a moment to think. How much of your time do you spend managing emails? Can we just have some examples from the audience? People think, how much of your time? Sorry? 3 hours a day. So what does that work out to as a percentage? Shitloads, okay. Some other examples? 60%. Yeah, okay. Well, the figures that I've got are based and trying to find stuff you know exists but you can't find it. Oh, well, 1 or 2 groans there. Yeah. Okay, we've obviously had that pain. And then how much is this amplified during change? Because the pressure's on, you guys, the change of government, we need this, we need it now, we need it yesterday. Okay, so the conservative figures that have come out in this study say that the average interaction worker spends 28% of their time managing email. I'm wondering if they only did this during the working day, they didn't do it for when we're doing our emails afterwards. And 20% sifting through and trying to find information. Now, I know there was also other studies done in the early 2000s. At the same time, Gartner and Royal Dutch Shell did a study on how much time it didn't do email, but it did trying to find stuff or duplicating what they knew existed. And both independently at the same time came up with a figure of about 30%. So when companies effectively use social media internally, messages become content. Content as a searchable record of knowledge can reduce by as much as 35% the time employees spend trying to find stuff. Okay? So okay. Well, we won't worry about that. That's probably the translation over to the new, from Mac to Microsoft. So we're going to use an example. So the average employee, an average salary of about 100 grand, 20% of their time finding stuff, 28% managing email. So that's 48% of their time. $48,000 per annum out of that salary is spent on that. 5% of that, so we heard that it could be up to 35%, but let's be realistic. If we can get a 5% improvement, that would be really cool. 5% is $2,400 per person per annum. In an organisation of 500 employees, you're talking $1.2 million per annum. So if we need to start breaking patterns, if we need to get senior managers to listen to some of this stuff that we need to do differently, then let's try and get them to see some figures that can help them in the first place, see it in a different way, and then we can take them on the journey. We call it the social productivity dividend. So I've used the figures here from Department of Health again. As I said, those figures came out 2012-2013 annual report, so the numbers are what they are at the time. I just pulled the figure out of the wind and said a $70,000 average employee salary. 20% finding staff, 28% managing email, 48% of their time was $33,600 per annum per person. So if we look at the staff numbers, 5% reduction was $1,680 per person. Staff numbers of 4,600-ish came out to a social productivity dividend of $7,961,000. If we're talking about getting productivity, then let's look at how we work and how can we work in a more effective way that delivers it to us. Not to mention is more intuitive. The majority of people seem to be working in this way in their private life. It's what we do, it's how we do it. People are having an expectation of that when they go into organisations. Those organisations are having to deliver that way of working. So the case study organisation, the important way to do it is you've got to recognise it's change management, but effective change management. It's about content marketing practices, so bringing in a different way of looking at your comms. And then it's about technology. And that social productivity dividend is at the sweet spot. So I'm just going to look at some data around those areas, change, communication and technology. And I'll let you read it. Organisations can shift from that failure to success, and our case study organisation, and there are others like that. They demonstrated how you can do that. You can actually make that shift. And a study done with IBM last year showed that organisations who master effective change principles have an 80% success rate in their projects. Change also requires vision, and we've talked about the leadership. It requires effective communication. The right message, the right person, the right time. All the hallmarks of that content strategy. And when we talk about the right message, right person, right time, it's about different ways of doing it, whether it's the back of the toilet door, the lift well, the Gen Y video, the whatever. It's communicate, but in effective ways. Many of you have probably read the State of Service report and you would have seen this. It's a bit of a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And in talking to people about these figures, even in smaller agencies, they say when you're going through change, it actually, the effectiveness of the communication drops off significantly, even in the smaller agencies. So your effective content strategy enables your effective change management strategy to be the message. So the message is understood by all your audiences because you understand who they are and how they communicate. Feedback loops are managed. because they have a voice. Change is effectively communicated. The case study example, the change strategy was the message. It wasn't a technology implementation any longer. They shifted it. They used multiple mediums, whatever they could get. They engaged and involved. So from the corporate affairs people who had their own communication roadmap about what they were doing, and these guys integrating theirs into it, right down to team leaders, to they didn't use the word users, which they felt that the only people who use the word users are drug dealers, and they thought that perhaps they should use a different term, which was very cute. The message was understood, the change was effectively communicated, which enabled the past patterns to break. Their adoption rates blown out of the water. Where there was assumptions around demographics and people not wanting to use the technology, blown out of the water. It wasn't about that. People were engaged, they were involved. These guys have won a national award and a state award for the work that they've done and the outcomes that they've got. Their effective content strategy was a significant part of it, and it unlocked their social productivity dividend within the organisation. So finally, we'll look at technology, and we've had a bit of a squeeze into technology earlier. Time to reach 50 million users. And there's probably something else that's come along since then. This is really interesting. In 6 years, there was a 10,000% increase. We talk exponential. We can't ignore the change, it's here. It's how do we work with it? How do we skill our people in different ways? We talked about the fact that learning agility, how can we help people understand that it's looking in different ways? It creates a whole new industry, big data. Because that's the alternative. That's back to John's, I suppose. So, the number one reason for social tools failing in organisations is starting with the technology first. We talked this morning about iterative processes. What we found is where you can do a small pilot, you actually learn from that pilot, you then do multiple small pilots, you take the learnings from the first one, test what's valid for those people, what isn't. Again, more multiple pilots, trying to achieve a critical mass, build capability. It's the viral nature of the social, it's who we are. A model is a model is a model. This is just one we use to help communicate. There's many, many models, but ours is just around, we have those factors of organisational change, communication and social technologies. Purpose. If you don't have a very clear purpose about what you're doing, then why are you doing it? The amount of people that I've spoken to who said that their purpose is to implement social media in their organisation. I'm sorry, that's not a business need. The business need might be that you have a very silo-driven organisation and you want to connect people up. The business need might be that your project managers need to work more collaboratively on their projects. Those are business needs, not that you need to have social media. People. If you don't recognise and address that it's about the people, don't bother. Because it's all about the people. And you have to understand that. Pathway is your strategy. How are you going to get there? At a high level, what is the overall strategy you're after? So how you can roll out those pilots and do it effectively. Planning. When we're getting down into that nitty-gritty, how do we plan effectively to do that? How do we make it sustainable? And persistence. How do we keep that amplification, that energy going? And again, that's where we're tapping into that content marketing principles. So, change, content, technology. Clear business need. If you don't understand that business need, then don't go forward. The reason why this approach works is because you're starting with the people first. You have to unpack some of that baggage that's sitting around there, the trust that's broken down in the organisation over how many years. People are walking around with ghosts around the corridors of the people who've left and it's never been processed. We talked about permission earlier today. Has anybody ever given people permission to process some of this stuff? Well, sometimes you need to take a little step back and take people through a process to enable them. And it doesn't have to be exhaustive and difficult. It can be simple as giving them a voice, allowing them to process in a structured way, and then showing them a way forward. And the leadership having that consistent behaviour, because that's the only way they're going to start to trust again, is if they see that consistent behaviour continuing. Because they'll be looking for it to fall down like it's always done in the past. Can you imagine those guys in that agency who went in and said, oh, we're coming in to fix the information management? And everyone, you're doing what? Yeah, good luck with that. 3 times. You're the 4th. Well done. We'll just get on with our job and ignore you, and you'll go away like the last 3 lots did. So what I want you to do now, most of you got pens and paper, I want you to calculate your social productivity dividend for where you are, for your business. So you can do it for your department, or you can do it for your group, you can do it for whatever you want. Okay, so guesstimate, what's your average salary? Write it down. Now there's prizes for people who's going to share on this. Okay, so average salary, 48% of that. Now, if you're like me and you're allergic to numbers, that's 50% with a little bit taken off, yeah?
Sorry, Michelle, is this individual? Not for the organisation?
For the organisation.
Oh, for the organisation.
You can do it for your team, your department, for the whole of federal public service if you want. I don't mind. So that works out, 48% of that is the per annum, per person. What is 5% of that 48% you came up with? This is where people are bringing out the calculators now, is it? On your phones? And then multiply that by number of employees. When you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. And if you stand still, you're going to go backwards. We've heard a lot about leadership and the difference they can make. Leadership doesn't always have to be in a hierarchical sense. If you can put the information together, you can lead from behind. You can go to the Johns, who will become an advocate for you and support you with his peers to get your voice heard, if you can give them the information that they need. It's about trying to find out what works in your patch. That's mine.